In May 1942, Samuel Zygelbaum, a Polish Jew and member of the Polish National Council in London, released and publicized a report prepared by the underground Jewish socialist Bund in Poland. Bund reported about the Einsatz group and mobile killing units practiced on Jews in Poland and Lithuania in the summer of 1941 using gas vans in Kelmo, Poland, and killing 1,000 people a day during the winter of 1941-1942. The conclusion of the Bund was that the Germans had already killed 700,000 Jews by May 1942, and that the Germans planned to exterminate the Jews of Europe. Authors of the Bund report asked the Polish government in exile in London to pressure the Allies to threaten retaliation if the Germans did not stop the Holocaust. Zygelbaum repeated the same message on the BBC on June 26, 1942. The Allies took no action in response to the Bund's report. Despairing, Zygelbaum committed suicide in London on May 12, 1943, hoping his death would publicize the destruction of the Warsaw Ghetto and German extermination policies. Nothing happened. Jan Karski, a Polish diplomat and Catholic, went into the Warsaw Ghetto in 1942 and the Belchik death camp as one of the Ukrainian militiamen. He obtained documents of the German plans to exterminate the Jews. In late 1942, he brought his report of the killings of the Jew in Belchik and Sobibor to London. He also saw a copy of the Bund report in Warsaw. Suggestions were made for the Allies to bomb the death camps. Karski came to the United States and met with Supreme Court Judge Felix Frankfurter. With the help of Frankfurter and the Polish ambassador, Karski met with the president, where he conveyed the details of what he had seen and what he was told by surviving Polish Jews. No action was taken. The United States government and the other Allies decided not to publicize the reports received in 1942 and 1943 of the extermination of the Jews. In November 1942, Rabbi Stephen Wise of the American Jewish Congress told a press conference in Washington that he estimated that 2 million Jews had already been killed, but his press conference also produced no action. 6 European nations maintained their neutrality during World War II: Ireland, Portugal, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, and Turkey. Switzerland became the key listening post during the war. A Swiss report published in 1955 indicated that the Swiss knew about the mass killing of Jews in 1941. A Swiss medical team reported on October 23, 1941, of witnessing 3,000 Jews killed. First reports of Swiss citizens in occupied Europe knowing about the killings of Jews took place in 1941, and Swiss medical teams visiting Germany from 1941 to 1943 reported knowledge of the events. Public reports appeared in the Swiss press in August of 1942 of the transportation of Jews from France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. In 1942, the Swiss government did not stop the press from reporting on the final solution. But in 1943, the Swiss government warned newspapers after they publicized the killings in Kiev at Babi Yar. The Swiss government officials did not want to provoke the Germans after they sent troops into Italy in 1943. Holocaust historians have noted that anyone reading the Swiss press in 1942 to 1943 would have realized that Germany planned to exterminate the Jews of Europe. Other neutrals also learned of the Holocaust. Swedes learned of it from a variety of sources. Swedish diplomats, journalists, and businessmen were visiting Germany. Swedish diplomats approached the Germans in 1941 and 1942 about what was happening to the Dutch and Norwegian Jews, but were told to mind their own business. Swedish authorities learned of the mechanics of deportation. The Swedish press initially self-censored the first reports of deportations and killings, did not report on the Holocaust until December 1942. The roundup of Norwegian Jews in November 1942 provoked public outrage in Sweden, and the press covered the deportation of Norwegian Jews. Spain learned of the plight of European Jews, but the fascist regime of Francisco Franco did not care about the fate of the Jews. The Vatican learned of German policies in 1942 from priests, bishops, and Catholic officials in German-occupied nations. About the same time, the International Rescue Committee of the Red Cross learned of the final solution. The Irish, Portuguese, and Turkish governments wanted to maintain their neutrality and did not want their press to antagonize the German government. In 1941 and 1942, the United States, Great Britain, and USSR did not want to focus on the fate of the Jews. Soviet newspapers covered the German attacks but refrained from mentioning the mass murder of Jews. The Soviet government was slow to warn Soviet Jews of the German plans and actions. American and British military, intelligence, and diplomatic personnel learned of the final solution, but decided not to publicize it because it might alienate or discourage non-Jewish Europeans to hear of the fate of the Jews. The American State Department attempted to keep the lid on information about the killings of Jews, and at times went out of its way to hide details of the final solution. Both the American and British governments did not want to emphasize the Holocaust for fear public demand for action by the Allies would hinder the war effort. However, reports of the mass killings of Jews behind German lines in the USSR leaked out. The Jewish Telegraphic Agency published reports in October and November 1941 of the massacres of Russian and Ukrainian Jews. Soviets confirmed this in January 1942, forcing the Soviets to provide limited reports in the spring of 1942 about German killings of civilians and Jews. But generally the Soviet authorities played down the German policy of singling out Jews for mass murder. On December 5, 1941, the New York Daily Tribune reported on the German policy of mass murder. Similar accounts began to appear in the British press. In June and July of 1942, the London Daily Telegraph and the New York Times reported that the Germans had already murdered 1 million Jews. By December of 1942, the New York Times reported 2/3 of the Jews of Poland were dead, 2 million people had been murdered, and another 5 million were in danger. British newspapers accurately reported in April 1942 that Romania had murdered 120,000 Jews. The American and British press publicized the final solution. For the American and British governments, saving Jews was not a priority. Winning the war was the major goal.